PM, everybody. I think we have enough folks here to consider a quorum, so we can go ahead and get started. Figured that, since most of the discussion will be centered around asking some of Publius's counsel questions around some of the investigation that did take place since the exploit, figured we should start there for today. So, Publius, I don't know if you had something you wanted to say to kick things off or introduce who would be doing some of the speaking and question answering today. If you're speaking, we can't hear you. Domo Dice. I can see you unmuting.
Can you hear me now?
We can't hear you now.
Well, it's probably best for Steve to introduce himself, so he can just take it away and probably introduce himself, and then people can just start asking questions. But we'll leave it to Steve.
Great. Hey, Steve. How you doing? Would be awesome if you can give a little bit of an overview to everyone about your relationship to some of the investigations that have happened up to this point. That would be, I think, helpful to kick things off.
And Steve, I think you're on mute, so the mute button's in the in the bottom left of Discord.
Well, in the meantime, while Steve is getting set up, would encourage everyone to either, if you have questions, to unmute when the time comes, and if not, drop some in the Barnyard chat. Don't see any questions dropped in there yet.
Steve, it seems like you're still muted, so you're going to need to click the unmute button.
Oh, we see you unmuted now. Can't hear you quite yet.
I just got in touch with Steven. He said he wasn't able to hear us, so he was trying to restart it. So hopefully in just a sec, he'll be online.
Sounds good. Well, while we have a few minutes, maybe we can...
Steve Feldman, can you hear me?
Hey, Steve, we can hear you now. How's it
Hey,
going?
guys, sorry about that.
No sweat. Were you able to hear anything up to this point?
Nope, this is the first moment I've heard, so I apologize for being late, guys.
No sweat. Was just asking, would be awesome if you could give a brief introduction to yourself and your relationship to the investigation related to Beanstalk, and I think that would be a great place to start as far as our discussion goes.
Absolutely. So I am a former federal prosecutor. Focus my practice on white-collar criminal defense, investigations, and compliance. I was a prosecutor in the securities unit at the U.S. Attorney's Office for 6.5 years, starting in 2002 and ending in 2008. And I've been a defense attorney and investigations attorney since that time, since May of 2008. So my colleagues and I were to assist Publius in strategizing how best to report the crime and get some action from the government, right? Everybody can file an IC3 form, which Publius took care of doing. But in my experience is, if you have folks who actually have been in the trenches, we can get taken more seriously by picking up the phone and using our contacts. So we were retained to help do that, come up with a strategy of how to get the government's attention, how to report the crime, and try to get law enforcement authorities and prosecutors to investigate and aid us and Publius and the DAO in getting all that done.
Could you give an overview of what has been done up to this point?
Yeah, I can give the overview from my standpoint, from the legal side. From when we came in, there had already been a security consulting tracing type investigations firm hired. That was Davis's firm. Davis's firm had already reached out to some agents, FBI agents.
Hey, Steve, I think you're cutting a bit in and out. Not sure if there's anything you can do to fix your mic a bit.
Let me try to come closer and move it. Maybe that'll be better. So let me hold on one second. Davis's firm had already reached out to
And
prosecutors.
Steve, can you maybe just say who Ed Davis is?
Davis is a investigating. He had background, I think, in the Boston police force as a high-level person there. Isn't that right?
Yeah, if I recall correctly, Ed Davis oversaw the Boston bombing investigation and aftermath as part of the Boston Police Department. And we originally retained him to do an investigation into the theft. So that's just, I think, a helpful piece of color to add. And Ed Davis, as you said, connected us with, I believe, the FBI and also the Secret Service. And sorry to interrupt.
Helpful, because that was a little bit right before we got involved.
So please continue.
And it was, really shortly after that, I think we really took over of Ed and his colleagues in terms of coming up with the strategy. The strategy we pursued at that point was to start a contact the FBI, make sure there were prosecutors on the case, and make sure that we had the attention of the government authorities and got them the information we needed. So one of the things we did is we reached out to the head of the Department of Justice's National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team, a woman named Eun-Young Choi, who had been at the same U.S. Attorney's Office where I worked. She was a prosecutor in the Southern District of New York before becoming DOJ's National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team head. So we reached out to the board and make sure she knew what was going on, and she validated and confirmed that there was a team through Ed Davis's contact of both FBI and federal prosecutors already involved in the case. Then we started working with those people, particularly with the federal prosecutor who was taking lead on this at the U.S. Attorney's Office in New Jersey. So that's not something we controlled, whether it went to New Jersey or New York or wherever. The FBI agents who I think were contacted by Ed took the lead in reaching out to prosecutors who they must have had relationships with. At that point, we made ourselves available to the prosecutors and to the FBI agents. We got their attention. We told them the background, the narrative of what had happened, what we, our thoughts on best of what we knew about what had happened, why we considered this a crime as opposed to just somebody doing something smart, and how it was fraud and how it was misleading, and why we thought that it was something they should be pursuing as criminal activity. After phone calls, after answering some questions from them, they then we prepared a memo laying out in detail the information we had collected, backed up by the documents and the information that we knew to date, and asked for Ben to do an interview. So
Ben sat for a 2-hour interview with the agents and the FBI agents and the federal prosecutor, and questions about anything they wanted to know, but really explaining what happened and why it was a crime and why we wanted them to look into this and take it seriously. And that there were then some follow-up questions from them where they asked for us to provide some additional answers to some questions, provide additional documents or documents that we had not provided. We did all that, and that really was where things stood. At that point, what I expected to happen is kind of where we are today. I mean, although not as quickly. Seen more results that we know about. But what happens in these situations is the government commences a grand jury investigation. They can issue subpoenas. They can make efforts to obtain documents from financial institutions, exchanges, anybody who they can reach out to with subpoena power. But all of those subpoenas are secret. They're part of a grand jury investigation. And they're not allowed to tell us who they've subpoenaed, whether those people are cooperating and they're getting documents back, or whether they are, or whether they've decided they're going to, not pay no attention to the FBI agents and prosecutors. So what happens in these situations, and this is routinely tough for my clients, is once an investigation commences, you don't get much information. The information you glean are things like, is there a prosecutor assigned to your case? And did they ask you questions? Did they do an interview? Well, we had those things. So we knew we had their attention at that point. They took it seriously. They spent time. But then they don't tell us what's going to go on until they can publicly charge someone, publicly reveal in a public forum what's happening. And the way they do that is through criminal charges or through sort of case where they might retrieve money, but that's often the next steps. They're not going to say to us, this is what we've done so far. This is our likelihood of success. This is who we suspect is involved. Did reach out recently and said, is there anything you can tell us? It's still ongoing. They said there's nothing we can tell you. Well, the one takeaway from there's nothing we can tell you is at least that they haven't closed the investigation. If they absolutely closed it, they might say to us, we've closed the investigation. We don't think this is something we should pursue. But we can't tell you anything. Actually, likely means they're doing a grand jury investigation. They can't tell us anything.
So again, anyone should feel free to unmute and ask, but I'll just go from the top of the chat. So Skizzerbra says, would love to know more info on the Kraken connection to the hacker's wallet. Steve, I'm not sure how involved you were with that information, whether it was part of the memo that you presented, or something to that effect. Not sure if you have any insight to share on that front.
Well, I mean, that would be something I'd feel better about if they have information to share, the details of that, than me putting it on that.
Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a hard time. I think your mic is cutting a bit in and out. Could you restate what you just said?
I'd prefer that somebody else answer that question if you can, in terms of the details of the Kraken connection and what you guys believe you have found. I mean, there are others out there who have tried to investigate how the different organizations are connected in the trail of the crypto. And certainly that we shared all of that information, everything that we knew that had been collected by different constituencies with the FBI agents and the prosecutor, but what it means and what the details are, I'm not the person to go into that.
Makes sense. Bacchus asked what information was known at that point. Bacchus, if you could specify what point you're referring to, that would be helpful. They also ask, was the potential Kraken link known during the interview? I'm not sure if maybe Publius would be the best person to answer that one, or if Steve, you know.
potential Kraken leak. So we had done, early on there had been some contact Kraken. There had been to think that Kraken had a role. We knew about that at the time that Publius did the interview. I mean, one of the reasons we were reaching out to the FBI is that Kraken made clear that you needed to have a subpoena, as all these organizations have take these position, that they're not going to just tell us because we're the victims. You need subpoena power, and so that's on the FBI and the prosecutors to use the grand jury subpoena power.
And so just to be clear, was that told to the FBI, like the information around the Kraken link?
I believe it was.
Is Bacchus next question? Got it. Okay, DeFi Summer asks, in your opinion, Steve, should the DAO hire a lawyer to represent it?
But it's a little bit of a bind when you ask a lawyer who, if someone needs a lawyer or should they get a lawyer. Generally, lawyers always just say yes. You should have your own. If you think you need your own lawyer, go get your own lawyer. I am Publius's lawyer, so I have particular clients, and that's who I'm working. In my view, from Publius's side, the interests of Publius are aligned with the DAO, and there's not more to be done at this point. At this point, unfortunately, if we have more information, I am happy to convey that information to the FBI agents, to the prosecutors, and if there is more information out there, that would be great. But I don't know what more another lawyer would do that I'm not already doing, even though I'm not representing the DAO as a whole.
IPO and Chill asks, Steve, what is your full name?
Stephen D. Feldman, and I work for the law firm Stradley, Ronan, Stevens, and Young, LLP. My New York office at 100 Park Avenue.
Great, appreciate that, Steve. We'll just pause for a few moments for folks to drop questions in the chat or unmute.
I've got a quick one, Steve. First of all, thanks for taking the time to come speak with us and walk us through everything. I'm curious, could you speak a little bit to the process of following up with the FBI or whoever else would be managing this case from a law enforcement perspective? I know that the response is generally, there's not much information to share, but I'm curious, to what extent you think we should be routinely, checking in and delivering them new information or, whatever information we have, I suppose, and to what extent that's been done thus far.
So, in terms of routinely checking in with them, I do, these professionals and boost them on a regular basis to do their jobs. They're trying to help us. That's why they're in these positions. That's why they have these jobs. And certainly, I try to be careful about the line between, hey, we would love an update if there's anything new to share, and I've become a bother in some way, and I'm being respectful of them just doing their job. So I don't like routinely just checking in with prosecutors, having sat in that seat in the past. If we have substantive, real information to give them, I encourage us to do so. Happy to package that up, send it as an email. We can send it to FBI agents. We send it to the prosecutor. If we have information, they'd be happy to take it from us. They won't say no. I imagine they are also following and investigating closely. I'm sure they have information and sources that we don't have. But if we do have substantive information, let's send it to them. I wouldn't want to be, I say to people that the prosecutors and the FBI are not our pen pals, right? They don't want to be hearing from us every day. Oh, I heard this and I saw that and somebody said this in the chat. We have real substantive information. Let's put it together in a memo. Let's have attachments and exhibits, and let's send it to them. Question, have we done that recently? No, we have not. I have not been aware of any new information to send them since the review and the information we provided after that, which was last year.
So Beans on Fire in the chat asked, Steve, if the SEC or another regulatory agency were to start asking questions into Beanstalk, would you act in a similar capacity as you are now? And I asked them to clarify what they meant by that, and they said they meant request statements or documents specifically.
SEC is out there looking us find the crypto and help us recover it. I imagine that I would talk with Publius and make sure that that's something they wanted me to be doing, and that we would be in touch with the point. But it's a little bit for me of a question that doesn't fit so well, because that's not really what the SEC does as much. They're more looking at I mean, it could be, and I imagine that we would cooperate with them, but it would be a question I'd have to ask Publius.
Hey, Beans on Fire. Not sure if you're unmuted intentionally, but there's some noise coming through your mic. But feel free to follow up over voice if you had something you wanted to add or follow up with. Okay, I'm gonna server mute you for now, Beans on Fire, but feel free to just ping me in the chat if you want to speak up. Okay, DeFi Summer asks, can you / your client upload the complaint that was filed with the FBI to the Discord?
Three that you guys are talking about, is that what they're referring to? The one. So I guess my answer is the following. I'm a little hesitant. I think as a group we're hesitant to the information provided to the FBI publicly to everybody, because any of that is secret and helpful to the FBI, we're people a roadmap if it becomes public on how to respond to whatever we've discovered so far, and make changes and take steps to hide their conduct. So my understanding is that the agreement has been that only those people, DAO members, who are affirmatively getting involved with the actual work of trying to help do investigations are going to get access to that information. I think that's a good plan. I endorse that. And I think it should be a little hesitant about sharing too much information publicly, given that we can't control who it goes to.
Okay, is asked, did we get a firm answer about whether the FBI was told about the potential Kraken link? My understanding from your last answer was yes, but in case you want the opportunity to clarify.
And I know our initial contacts with Kraken and what we learned early on, if that's what you're referring to, yes, all of that was shared with the FBI.
All right, DeFi Summer follows up and says, could you simply redact said information that may tip off the hacker if that is a concern? They're referring to the sharing of some of these documents publicly.
The question is, if you're redacting everything that you're worried is going to make be everything that might be helpful to the hackers is going to be the information that you guys want to see. What would you be not redacting in this situation, I guess? I mean, that's a call. It's not a legal decision, right? It's a strategy decision. The community decides that all of this information should be shared with everybody, and to what degree. You guys are free to do that. This is, but in terms of my role in wanting to counsel Publius and make the best scenario for recovery and not step on the FBI or DOJ's toes, I would counsel being careful about publicizing the information already shared with the government.
Can you briefly describe what type of information is in question here? That you mentioned, you're skeptical of sharing. Seems like there's some mixed opinions in the community about whether that would be good or bad to do. It'd be great if you could explain at least like what kind of insight is there.
Dave,
if it's possible to do so without, revealing anything.
I mean, I think we gave the FBI and the prosecutors a package done up until the dates of the conversation. So there had been research efforts by organizations out there. Those research reports were collected. There were email conversations with organizations such as Kraken to try to get their help. Who had we contacted? What had they said? What were their responses? Suspicions of things we had seen going on out there. IC3 report, our explanation and understanding of how the exploit went down, the various iterations of what had happened, what had been proposed, what had been voted on, so we could explain to them how it happened. Those are the different things we provided.
Helpful, thanks. I'll just pause and leave the floor open again for folks to speak up or drop questions. Pocket being asked, are there any civil suits that you are aware of against any of the parties involved?
I'm not aware of any civil suits or any contemplated civil suits.
DeFi Summer asks, can the DAO/Publius file a civil suit against Kraken?
Silly answer, right? First of all, you can file a suit against anybody for any reason you want. The question is, do you have a case you're likely to win? That, of course, would require some analysis of what would be the cause of action, they do wrong, and evidence do you have that's going to survive a motion to dismiss? So if the theory is that Kraken conspired with before or after the fact the person who conducted the exploit, any evidence of that, then maybe there's a basis for a lawsuit. I'm not aware, from my vantage point, from what I've learned to date, of a viable reason to bring a lawsuit.
Bacchus asked, when was the most recent information given to the FBI? Has it been since April of last year?
It was around July 14th of last year.
Well, and what was learned then that wasn't learned or closer to the exploit? Or is that information that would not be a good idea to share? Publicly, that is.
part of it isn't what was necessarily learned. Part of it is following up. So we were also educating the FBI on Beanstalk, right? The FBI needed to understand, how the exploit worked and what were all the different processes. Part of what we're doing is responding to their questions in addition to just sending them information. Educating them on Beanstalk right. They didn't know a thing about Beanstalk. So we're educating them from the ground up about it. That was part of the process.
Makes sense. So you said July was the most recent time that happened, where you're answering questions or giving new information. And I believe you mentioned earlier that more recently, like in the last few weeks, they did confirm that the investigation was still open. Is that correct? Not sure if you can still hear me, Steve, but if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Right, I'll repeat it. What they did not say the investigation's ongoing. They don't even say that to us. They simply say there is no additional information they can share with us at this time. I take that to mean there's still an investigation. Otherwise, it would be a little misleading for them to tell you they can't share any more information at this time. But they don't even just say there's no more information they can share at this time.
Which, to be clear, is you're saying it's not explicitly saying the investigation is still open, but you're saying it implicitly is.
That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you. It's a better way of saying it.
No worries. Got it. Makes sense. So DeFi Summer, who asked if the DAO could file a civil suit against Kraken, they follow up and said, what about a negligence suit?
To have going a little outside of what my role here is, right? Which is I'm here to help, and Publius in particular, who are my clients, bring to the prosecutors, the FBI, any other law enforcement, that we've all been victimized, that you were all victimized by this exploit, and trying to get law enforcement to go after and help do that, help resolve this. One of the reasons people law enforcement to do these things is because they don't, we pay taxes and law enforcement acts. We don't have to pay out of our own pocket for separate private lawyers to try to bring a lawsuit and prove it and all those things that go on. So not analyzed whether the DAO has a negligence case or any other kind of case to bring against Kraken. That's not been my marching orders. So I'm a little out on a limb here to tell you whether you could bring a negligence case against Kraken or not. I haven't analyzed it. I don't really want to give an opinion on it, quite honestly.
Albin asks, what are the different states that a grand jury investigation can be in, i.e. active, ended, can it be put on hold? Is it possible that we can sit here for years without knowing anything, or will it eventually end one way or another?
So, grand investigations can go on for eternity. There's no particular deadline. The deadline, quite honestly, is the statute of limitations, right? Generally, it's 5 years from the time something occurs for the government to bring a criminal case. There's sometimes reasons even that can be delayed. For example, if you are seeking records overseas, send out a request to get overseas records, which can take, a year or more to get a response sometimes. That request can delay statute of limitations and stop it from going forward. And grand jury investigation is seen as either open or closed. It can have times when it's very quiet, right? You send out a bunch of subpoenas to financial institutions, and it might take them 6 weeks or 3 months to provide you what do those records mean. That they dig through those records once they get them back to figure out what do those records mean. What more? Who do they need to subpoena next? Are there follow-up people to question? And going through the records and doing that for some period of time, the prosecutors and the FBI agents will come to a conclusion. Either we have probable cause to believe a crime's been committed and we've identified a particular person as the person who we think there's probable cause to believe committed that crime, then we indict that person if we want to, or we decide we don't, or for whatever reason have exercised our discretion not to go forward with charging anybody with a crime. So that's, how these things usually play out. And if they don't charge anyone with a crime, they don't really announce that so often either. Although sometimes they may say, we've decided to close the investigation and let some of the victims know that. But it's less, that's also not frequently done. I have plenty of cases where I have clients who are worried that they're being targeted in grand jury investigations, and you never know when it really ends.
So I think what ETH Wallet's question is intended to mean is, can individual members of the DAO can individual members of the DAO open a class action complaint? Should they?
All right, that's beyond what I'm here to give advice about, guys. Can you file a law? Anybody can go file a lawsuit. The basis to bring a class action, and against whom and by whom, and who would do that? I'm not here to give opinions about that, guys. I'm sorry.
Well, regardless, appreciate you coming here to field questions and being willing to play ball. So I'll wait to see if more folks have questions they want to chime in with as well. All right, last call for questions. Going once. All right, I think we'll go ahead and leave the DAO meeting at that for this week. Apologies, I had to reschedule, and thank you very much, Steve, for coming today and answering all of our questions.
Pleasure. I'm happy to help, and hopeful that we have good folks from the FBI and U.S. Attorney's Office who are in us. So my thought is hopefully that while this might take time, I'm hopeful that we have good people there to help us, and that we might get good results someday.
Likewise. Well, appreciate it, Steve. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.